Alright everyone, welcome back to another Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes video with Fat Phil, and today we're going to be looking at when to farm older characters. When does it make sense to circle back and farm older characters, to farm something that's almost like a side project? And this is a question that was raised on a live stream, and I thought it was really good because it came from a player who was in the end game, closer to my kind of galactic power. And so I was like, well, there's not a great answer for an account like that, but I was going through and I was like, what criteria would I use to tell somebody to farm older things? And we'll get into what old is, what does that mean. So like and subscribe, comment down below, let me know your thoughts. I'd love to hear from you guys. And of course, we got to give a big shout out to the channel members. I apologize, we're getting some things working on the title cards here. So in the meantime, please enjoy this amazing introduction from our great friend Moonborn. I freaking love this thing. Alright, so let's get back into the game here and let's break down when to farm these older factions, teams, characters. So first, I kind of have these three as just, you know, examples of things that I could potentially be considering old. So we've got like the ancient category, which is characters who've been here for a very long time. Then I kind of called like Tuskens newish, where there's some older parts to them, but overall as a faction, they're still what I would consider a newer faction, right? Yes, characters like Shaman, Raider, you know, I sound more like a walrus than a Tusken when I do that, but hey. They've been around for a while, but in terms of being a, you know, A, B tier faction, they're still new. And then Night Sisters, I've kind of gone with revamped, where for a while they were a staple team, then they weren't, then Merrin kind of came in, revamped that faction. So they're a revamp, right? They're not old, they're not new, because they've gotten this kind of facelift here where these guys, like, this was not a faction you could use outside of 3v3 Grand Arena until we got Chieftain and Warrior. Whereas Night Sisters, a lot of players were using them long before Merrin. So that's kind of how I broke those out. And again, just a few examples, there's plenty more to look at. But the first question to ask yourself of, hey, when should I go back and farm some of these older things? Because a lot of us are in this position, like myself and a lot of other players, where you're farming the newest things. You're going for Leia and Jabba and Bo-Katan and Gungans. And you're not really going for some of these older things that exist in the game. And that would be, think of your older Galactic Legends. That's what the Lightspeed bundles were doing. Think about, you know, some of these other Journey Guide things like Malak and General Skywalker. Going back and getting your Revans and Afra. That kind of stuff. There isn't a, you know, when you do those things, you kind of have to ask some questions. So the first one you want to ask, right, is like, are you building a full team or are you building parts of a team? And that's just Journey Guide stuff, but think about like other teams that exist, but are you building the whole thing or is it just certain parts? So if I wanted to have the Sana Starros team, I'd need to build Sana, I'd need to gear Cara Dune, Stormtrooper Han, but then I have Rebel Officer Leia Organa and Captain Han already in my account, so like I'd be good there. If I wanted to build a better Dash Rendar team, and that means building IG-11 and Queel, I've already got them. So that's just building parts of a team, right? So the amount of work you need to do to complete your goal is a big part of that question. Because if you're going to do a full team from scratch, there's a lot more work involved and a lot more planning that needs to go into that, rather than, hey, I'm going to go take, you know, Queel to Relic 5. That's, for me, one character to relics is not that hard, but taking a bunch or a full team, that's a lot more work involved. Then the question to ask is, how old is that team, is that character? And this is a very important question that you need to ask in a lot of avenues of life, right? Like, how old? And there goes the monetization for this video. Oh god. No, but we're not asking like, oh, like, you're not asking what's your age, but what's your age again? But it's about whether they need Kyratex before Gear 13 or not. So like your Tuskens, right? My Tusken Chieftain, he needs Kyratex right now to go from Gear 9 to Gear 10. Whereas Queel does not need Kyratex before the finisher piece, just like IG-11, right? They only need these pieces at their finisher, compared to characters who, at, you know, other times need those pieces all the way up to and including their finisher. So that is an important question to ask, because it does highlight the kind of planning and involvement that goes in. When you're building something like Inquisitors, It's a heavy Kyrotech faction. You've really got to be paying attention to them. Hey, I'm trying to build the CLS team. There's not really that much Kyrotech involved there, so it's more so on that core gear, and it's a lot lighter on your gearing process. So you can focus your resources in some other ways because the Kyrotech isn't as big of a problem. But this is the big mistake, right? This next thing is a huge mistake that players forget to think about. Once you get to gear 12, right? Once you've gotten here, everything equalizes out. Regardless of how old a character is, once you get to gear 12 and into relics, the resources to increase that level are the same. Yes, some characters might use different pieces here or here than each other, but overall, the general concept is the same, that like every gear 12 is of an equal value. You know, you could argue that the Mark 12 furnaces are the most common piecing, you'd be right. But overall, the value of gear 12 to gear 13 does not change between a character who was released in 2018 and a character and the Gungans that were released recently. There's no change there. There's maybe the gear is different, but the overall cost of it would be the same to Capital Games. Same thing with relic levels. So you really do need to ask yourself what relic level you're planning to go to. Trying to build a relic 3 character is there's far less investment involved than going and trying to build relic 7, relic 8 characters. So before you go and try and figure out, hey, I'm going to build this older team, well, what relic level are you going to take them to? Do you just need them at gear 12, or do you need relics on them? Because you need to think not only, hey, does the relic level make sense, right? But hey, you know, getting to gear 12 is easy for Queel, but do I have the signal data to take him where he needs to be in order to get the use out of him? So that is a big question that I feel oftentimes we don't think about. We're always like, oh yeah, go gear Beresfil, she's super easy. I'm not worried about the gear. I don't have the signal data to spend right now. So that's why you ask this, you know, hey, where do you build these things? Well, what relic level you plan to go to? Then what's your current investment level, right? Looking at my Jawas, I've got them all at like gear 8 and then 1 relic. And you compare that to, say, my Night Sisters, where we've got, 3 gear 12s, 2 lower relics, or even going all the way over to my Rogue One faction, where I've got 4 relics, and so I'm just missing a 5th. Your current investment is a big deal. Because when you're trying to figure out, hey, not only is it about, are you building a whole team or parts, but what's your actual current investment in that team? Are you just trying to increase relic levels? Are you doing gear? The current investment plays a big role, because if you're really close to something, it might make sense to invest in it now in the middle of a farm, knowing that it's going to completely change the way that you get to play Galaxy of Heroes. Compared to other instances where I see teams or, where, like if I wanted to get Relic Jawas, that's a much tougher investment for me than Relic Night Sisters, right? Because I've got more invested here. And if I want to get Relic 7 Night Sisters, or I want to get, say, Relic 7 Imperial Remnants, I'm much closer on the Remnants, because not only do I have some of them there already, but everybody's at relic level, so there's no gear required. So again, just what is your investment level, right? All of those are very important to ask, right? Then finally, the final 2 things. What are your future plans? So, Bo-Katan, right, is my current project right now, and then I'm going into Gungans and Queen Amidala's team. So my future plans are very Kyrotech, Zeta, signal data intensive. There's a lot of resources I'm going to have to be spending in the coming months to complete my future plans. So that kind of gives me a baseline that if I'm trying to do these teams like, if I'm trying to build this stuff, Tusken's kind of off the table because I need the Kyrotech. I don't have the Kyrotechs to invest in Warrior and Chieftain. Jolee and Barris could be solid options because I already have Zetas equipped there. So yes, there's a little bit of Kyrotech on the finisher piece, but realistically, it's not too much to ask to get them to relics, right? Like, okay, fine. The big thing with them that kind of detracts me is I would need to get them at least to relic 5 in order to get solid use out of them in a Grand Arena situation. I can't even use them. I could barely use them in Rise of the Empire at that point. Then what about your team like a Night Sisters, where these girls, one of the reasons I've really been considering it is that I can take them to relic 3 and still get solid use out of them. That obviously I'd love to get them to super high relics, but even getting them to relic 3 is not that big of a deal. I've got the Zetas equipped. They've got decent mods already, so that's kind of where my mind's heading right now, is that Night Sister's kind of looking like that next team for me to build, because they're not going to eat up signal data. They're not going to eat up any more Zetas. And that's going to allow me to build my future plans. So those questions kind of lead you into where you build stuff. There's not this 5 million GP, 6 million GP. It's where are you at and kind of what you're trying to build. What is your goal? Like me, when I went and built Admiral Trench, right? Where's my farming, actual farms? There it is. Like I went and built Admiral Trench, and a lot of you were like, Phil, what are you doing? Why are you building Trench? The thing is, while those resources could have gone towards my Mandalorians, I had the rest of Trench's team reliced and ready to go from other things. So adding Trench gave me a full other team that otherwise I was not able to use. And I can tell you that it's paid off, that I've noticed a change in my account with Trench in it compared to without Trench. And that same thing will apply to other kinds of other factions as well, like maybe a Rogue One, where one extra relic gives me a team that I can actually use, Datacrons on. Because right now, I'm kind of throwing Baze in there, and it's not really helping me. And then finally, another good example here would be, thinking through like Jedi. By going and gearing up these characters, it's going to give me additional options to utilize Cal Kestis more. But all of that said, right, going back and building these older teams is smart. You just need to time it properly. You don't want to just do it because you've got resources burning a hole in your pocket. You want to do it when it's going to make sense. And so that, hey, what's the impact of what you're going to do is I think the final thing. For me, like taking Night Sisters to Relic 3, it's a team I can use in Grand Arena, offensively, and allows me to maybe set a little bit more on defense. Okay? Like, that's good. Hey, building Barriss or Jolie, what does that do? Maybe I get to use a Jedi Knight Cal Kestis team on offense. Not as big of an impact, so not as important. But these are kind of the questions that help you determine when to build those old teams, right? I think a lot of times we overlook the relic level. So it's not just do you have the gear, or hey, they're easy to gear, but do you have the resources to, finish your current plans and then your future ones. Like right now is a good time where I could maybe do some small relic levels, because I'm still a long way away from getting Kelleran back, Paz Vizsla, Grogu, and then even like the Armorer. Conversely, you could also think about trying to, don't be afraid to save it. If you're still like, oh, I'm not sure that I've got the resources, don't be afraid to save it for a little bit. Now, don't just hoard for the sake of hoarding, but if you're not sure that now's the right time to build that older team, hang on to your gear a little bit, see how things are happening, and then you'll maybe reach a point where you're like, crap, if I had Queel and IG-11, I could have won that Grand Arena. Boom, I can gear them up, and now you've got the resources to do that and still work on those current farms. So that's kind of how I look at building older teams. It's not black, it's not white, it's a gray thing of, hey, where does it make sense based on these criteria, based on these questions that I've asked myself? If my answer is, hey, I'm going to build two things. They're older characters, so not as much Kyra Tech. I'm going to take them to Relic 3 or Relic 5. I've got enough invested in the team, and I don't think it's going to interfere with my future plans, then you're rocking and rolling. So if you can answer those things and, it's like a, hey, minimal, all that kind of stuff, you're in good shape to work on some of those older factions. Because I think right now in the game, the one thing that's really difficult is you kind of have to be building these new things. Like Gungans and Bo-Katan, they're going to be very important in the coming months. And so it's really hard to circle back to those older teams. So you've got to do it when it makes sense with your current plans. I love you all. May the Force be with you. And I will see you guys in the next video. Cheers, my friends.